Hello and welcome to Voices of Enablement by GTMBuddy, an interview series focusing on the key issues affecting the enablement community today. It's a tough market right now. Organizations are cutting staff, pausing investment. How do you make a compelling use case for the value of enablement is a core question that we are seeking to answer. So our guest today is Felix. Felix is the founder of sales enablement consulting firm called Fast Forward, and he also runs a podcast series, the State of Enablement Podcast. And he speaks to a lot of enablement leaders, and he's also an enablement leader himself. So I thought he'll bring a lot of perspective of his own. Welcome, Felix. Pleasure having you on the show. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Devanshu. It's great to be here. And looking at the lineup of people you guys have previously interviewed, I really feel honored to be part of it. And yeah, as you mentioned, the discussion around enablement business impact is just on my alley. So really looking forward to dive in. But yeah, for those people that don't know me and are not familiar with my work, so my name is Felix Krueger. And over the last 15 years, I've been operating in the sales enablement space across media and technology. In the last 7 years, I've been running a couple of enablement vendor businesses myself, consulting businesses of different types. My current business is called FFWD, and it is a consulting firm that specifically focuses on supporting businesses that are just embarking on their enablement journey in formalizing their enablement strategy and roadmap. And for those businesses that already have enablement resources and a function in place, we also offer services that help them to increase their capacity to deliver high impact enablement initiatives. And as you mentioned before, I also run a podcast called the State of Sales Enablement, which is why I feel right at home here.
Absolutely. Again, pleasure is all ours. And I think you have a vantage point. You bring the perspective, one from the in-house enablement team and also from the consulting world. So I'm sure it'll be a lot of learning for the other enablement practitioners.
Awesome. Let's
do it. Let's get into this. So I think, again, I speak to a lot of enablement leaders, and then you also speak to a lot of enablement people. And it's a tough, situation right now. Enablement leaders are getting challenged with about showing the ROI of their initiatives. So the very first question that I have is, how do you elevate the role of sales enablement with the C-suite when many support functions are being cut?
I think, what I'm about to share is not only relevant to the current situation when support functions are being cut, but this is also something that you can generally apply to elevate the role of enablement. I guess at the moment, there's a greater urgency just simply because there are jobs on the line. And in some cases, it is really a question of survival for enablement teams. But I think nonetheless, it's always worth following those principles. And I really strongly believe that it's to make the case for enablement, you really have to view the internal dynamics and the conversations that you lead with senior executive leadership, just like the conversations you would lead with buyers in the market. Yeah. And that means you really have to understand what drives them, what their challenges are, how they make decisions, and what really matters to them. Yeah. And what you can contribute to bring them from point A and to point B. Yeah. And typically, when those tough decisions are being made around budget cuts, the key people involved are the CEO and the CFO. Yeah. And those two leaders would then typically sit together and discuss what are the functions that are essential for the business to survive given our current financial trajectory. Yeah. And the financial trajectory in some cases might be the funding of a startup, but in cases like the current economic environment, it can really well be the revenue being brought in compared to the cost that the business is dealing with. Yeah. And when those leaders ask themselves the question of which functions are really essential for the business, they will just make really rational, hopefully rational decisions around which functions really add value and are really needed in that context. Yeah. And more often than not, at the moment at least, given the announcements that are being made, enablement unfortunately doesn't make the cut. Yeah, and I think there's a disconnect there between the potential of enablement and really the value that is being showcased in a lot of cases. And from my point of view, there's kind of two types of evidence that is being provided when making the case for enablement. And people that are just as big on the true crime show front as I am will be familiar with these terms. But there's two types of evidence. Yeah, there's circumstantial evidence and there's a forensic evidence. Circumstantial evidence is the evidence that is more indirect. Yeah, it requires inference to connect it to a conclusion. Yeah, and in criminal justice, that, for example, would be that the accused person has been seen close to a crime scene. Yeah, in an enablement context, it might be that there has been anecdotal feedback being provided around the impact of enablement. For example, a sales rep stating, "Okay, we have learned so much recently. I feel like I'm selling so much better. There is evidence there, but it is not really clear. You still have to make conclusions based on that feedback, and it is really not clear, and it's open for interpretation. Yeah, it is valuable information, but it doesn't necessarily prove that something happened. Yeah, then you've got forensic evidence, which is really scientific evidence. In the criminal context, it would be something like DNA, for example. Yeah, in an enablement context, there'll be the equivalent of measuring sales performance through hard data or biofeedback. Yeah, so that you have really on paper what has been achieved by the enablement function. Yeah, and this really comes down to metrics and measurement. And what I typically see the most successful enablement teams, not only from an impact point of view that they're able to generate, but also from a support point of view, from senior executive leadership, do really well, is to really clearly define the North Star metrics, which are oftentimes sales velocity and sales productivity, as well as the leading indicators that are in place to actually support those metrics. So meaning the amounts of training sessions conducted, the amount of coaching provided, and so on, and how those activities have impacted those metrics that are connected to those North Star metrics, like sales cycle duration, deal size, win rate, conversion rates per sales process stage, and so on. And if you do this consistently, and you are consistently able to showcase the impact that enablement has on those different metrics, you then suddenly have forensic evidence, and there's no opinion around whether enablement provides value to the business or not. It is real hard evidence that is on paper, and there's no discussion around it.
Yeah, that was, I think, Felix beautifully put, because I think now more than ever, there is a need for us, for the enablement, to show the forensics evidence. Nobody's questioning that the amount of training will not have an impact on the sales revenue or the performance, but there wasn't just any I would say, tangible proof. But I think if we are tying it to the North Star revenue metrics, which is the sales productivity and sales velocity, automatically it will be able to show the outcome of the enablement initiatives, and then it will not be seen as a cost center, but maybe a force multiplier, because of the outcomes they're breaking.
And there's been so much discussion around that, on LinkedIn, people discussing the business impact that enablement has to deliver, and a common argument by those people arguing against being measured against metrics like sales productivity or sales velocity. They say there are so many other factors in play that enablement cannot influence. It's not worth focusing on those, and it's rather about the amount of training sessions being run, the amount of coaching sessions being conducted, and so on. I really strongly believe that, yes, it is very complex, and yes, enablement doesn't impact every single variable at play, including the market dynamics. But all we can do is the best, and we can try our best. And enablement, as we all know, has great potential to make a business impact. And if we don't try to maximize the potential of enablement, what are we doing?
Yeah. And I think it's a similar time what it was for the marketing team, I think, sometime back, where there wasn't any attribution of their efforts to the sales success, right? People were just building content or doing the efforts, but there wasn't any proof of, okay, this is the revenue outcome that we have. And look at, the CMOs have the sales velocity target. So I think it's a similar time for the enablement. So it's not true that they don't have anything in the hand, but I think it starts with the reverse approach on what are the goals that we have, revenue goals that we have, and then design our sales enablement initiatives based on that. And that way we'll be able to measure it.
Yeah. I love that reference to marketing. There's an old saying by American industrialist John Wanamaker, who said famously that half of my advertising budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. I think previously, that was true for marketing before digital measurement came into play. And I do believe very strongly that this has to be so true for sales as well, because we have so many data points at our disposal. It is a wasted opportunity not to engage those.
Yeah. Makes sense. Felix, one other question is, I think Forrester was talking about it. How can we enablement, again, I think it's a subset of the question that I just asked. How can enablement be a strategic partner and not just a tactical partner to the sales team? And I think it starts with aligning on the revenue outcomes, on the sales velocity outcomes, because that is where when they get a seat on the table. But I'm happy to understand more on what other initiatives they can take, or how else can sales enablement talk about elevating their role in terms of being a strategic partner and not looking as somebody who is just conducting the training for the salespeople.
Yeah, absolutely. I think generally speaking, sales effectiveness should be always the number one goal. Yeah. So improving sales effectiveness and the metrics that come with it should always be the ultimate goal of enablement. And I think only viewing training as the performance lever for achieving that is really a wasted opportunity. And my business partner, Mike Kunkel, some of you listeners might be familiar with his name. He's the author of the book Building Blocks of Sales Enablement. And This framework that he advocates for, which he has developed over the last 35 years, has 15 different performance levers that can be engaged. Yeah, and those are 15 opportunities for enablement to add value. And I'll quickly run through those just to illustrate what sort of opportunity is there. Yeah, and so there's buyer acumen. This is the understanding of the buyer personas as well as the decision-making process and the buyer journey. There's buyer engagement content, the content that is being used to reduce friction during the buying process by providing information asynchronously. Then there's sales support content, which helps sellers conduct tasks at a higher quality. So things like a sales playbook, calculators, and so on. And then there's sales hiring, for example, the way reps are assessed and the way they are being tested through the hiring process to really make sure that they are able to bring those skills to the table that they are hired for. Then there's sales training, of course. This is what we were just talking about, which is typically the core focus of a lot of enablement functions. And sales coaching, which is all about reinforcing those training contents. Yeah. Now, the next one is sales process. And this is, of course, answers the question of what is being done on the sales teams and to support the buyer's journey and to reduce friction during the buyer's journey. Then there's sales methodology, which answers the question of how it is being done, how the buyer is being supported on their journey. And then there's sales analytics and metrics, what we talked about earlier, all the metrics that are being attached to actually measuring sales and sales enablement success. And then we're not quite done yet. Then there's sales tech and tools, right? This is the whole technology stack that comes with sales. Everybody knows GTM Buddy plays in that space, and the sales tech space is almost exploding, just like the MarTech space has been about 10 years ago. Then there's sales compensation, so the how you structure compensation and incentives so that that sellers actually showcase the behaviors that the business is interested in. Sales manager enablement, so all the tools that sales managers need to operate effectively. Sales support services, so things like deal desks, RFP support services. And then lastly, communication across the business and also systems thinking. So systemizing approaches across those different building blocks that I've just outlined in order to achieve replicable and predictable results. Yeah. So all these areas that I just outlined, those are all areas that enablement can either own or support, which all impact sales effectiveness. And if you get the planning process right and you really make sure that you understand the overall business objectives for the year, you understand how the go-to-market strategy feeds into that, and then what improvements can be made on the sales effectiveness fronts to really support the go-to-market strategy. This is really where the magic happens, and this is where enablement can prove its value as a strategic partner to the business, and not just be the sales training department that just runs the onboarding sessions.
Yeah. I think that was very comprehensive, Felix. Again, very similar to this. I haven't read the book on the building blocks of sales enablement, but Forrester was talking about the same thing. Sales retention, sales attrition, everything will correlate to sales enablement. If we are educating if we're elevating the sales rep performance, they will be doing the targets, and unlikely they'll be leaving the company. So it all, even the deal desk or sales compensation, I think there are a lot of other hats that they have to wear. It's not just the training, but there are a lot of other things that they can do to be a strategic partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, sales hiring, sales training, and sales coaching are probably three of the most potent building blocks in that whole lineup that I just mentioned. But it would be a massive mistake to neglect those other areas, because they also provide incremental gains and sometimes can solve major problems from a sales effectiveness point of view for the business. Yeah,
totally aligned. Yeah, so the next question that I have, because you spoke about everboarding. So, again, one problem that everybody faces is that we train the sales rep, but they're forgetting the information that obviously derail the ROI of the initiative that sales enablement teams are doing. So how do you think, what is the role of sales enablement in terms of elevating the sales rep with in terms of reinforcing the content or in terms of everboarding? How do you think can they do it when, people are just forgetting the information even after onboarding?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the major initiatives that I would recommend to any team that is embarking on the enablement journey is to teach managers how to coach. Yeah. So sales managers are the ultimate multipliers and reinforcers of any sort of enablement activity. Yeah. And, some businesses think it is enablement's role to be the coach, but this has proven over and over again not to be the right approach. Yeah, sales managers really add the most value if they closely engage with their team and reinforce those behaviors that have proven to be effective for the business over and over again. And sure, training content, sales support content, they also play a role in making sure that those behaviors that you want to achieve are being reinforced. But sales managers are really the key to achieve that long term. And I have seen I've heard of businesses previously that have done a lot of investment around sales enablement being the coach. And for those businesses, when they had to do budget cuts, it was actually the other way around. They cut the amount of sales managers because they didn't see them adding as much value as sales enablement did, right? Because sales enablement was coaching and actually reinforcing training content and ultimately leading to behavioral change that resulted in revenue.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought it up, because this is one other question or challenge that everybody speak about, that frontline sales manager can play a vital role in terms of reinforcing the training content. But unfortunately, enablement doesn't get a lot of support from the frontline sales managers, because they often see it as maybe another chore to be done, or they think, okay, the rep productivity is getting wasted. They should be focusing more on the selling activities, and they actually become one of the buyers for the sales enablement. That how do we convince the frontline sales managers the importance of this particular training? So can you talk to us more on that? What are the discussions that you prefer having with the frontline sales managers, or what are the outcomes that you talk about to get their buy-in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think engaging frontline sales managers is absolutely crucial, as part of the overall stakeholder engagement that enablement has to do, right? And when it comes to stakeholder engagement, I would always recommend for enablers to first engage the sales leader, so the head of sales or the VP of sales, first to really understand the challenges on a high level, and really understand what sort of value enablement can provide from his or her point of view. Then it's really important to engage senior executive leadership, so that the buy-in is there from their end to then create the alignment across the organization from the different heads of the departments, whoever might collaborate with enablement, no matter if it's customer success or marketing or human resources or learning and development, whoever it might be, right? But sales managers are then the other group that are really crucial, because as you said, if they don't collaborate and if they're not aligned, nothing will happen, right? You can develop the fanciest training programs, you can have the greatest sort of coaching frameworks that you roll out. If they don't want to collaborate, nothing will happen, right? And because of that, it is really crucial, especially when it comes to developing training content, to really involve them early in the development of the content. So do that analysis up front in collaboration with them, to really hear from the front line, what are the challenges that you guys are dealing with? Considering the current pipeline that you have, what do the deals that you guys are working on that are in jeopardy have in common, and what is the reason for that? Really do that root cause analysis and really show them that you have their best interest in mind. You want to make their life easier, right? And once that collaboration early on happens in developing the training content, that's when the sales managers not only buy in, but they also become really familiar with the training content early on, which also then helps them to reinforce it and really advocate for it within their sales teams. That's typically the approach that I would recommend. And then, of course, it is important to also show them how to coach. So not only providing occasional feedback, but really making sure that they do the analysis around where the gaps are for different reps, and then really have a structured approach and planning coaching sessions that really aim at improving particular skills for those sales reps. So this is typically how I would recommend manager enablement to commence.
Right. No, actually, I love it, because you spoke about analyzing the current deals. Okay, why are we not able to close them? And analyzing, okay, which rep is probably lacking in which competency. Now you can't have a sales manager talk about the discovery to every sales rep. You need to analyze, okay, which rep is struggling with discovery, which rep is struggling with probably the other competency, letting the sales manager know that, hey, these are the reps that you're struggling with these kind of competencies. And then they'll be able to see the value in terms of reinforcing the content, and you will be able to measure that, hey, these are the programs that we did for the behavioral change, and this is the outcome that we have.
Absolutely. And that's again where metrics come into play, right? If you have the measurement in place, you can measure the conversion rates per sales process stage and the time spent at each sales process stage. You can benchmark it across the entire sales force. You can benchmark it per team. And then you can, once you have the data per individual sales rep, you can really easily identify who's falling short in which area, right? And if the business as a whole falls short in a certain area, and you see you're losing, for example, deals over and over again during the demo stage, right? Then it is worth going back to the drawing board and really doing your market research and understanding what the actual needs are from buyers to make sure that you are actually meeting those needs at that stage. But generally speaking, doing the data analysis really makes it clear on where the shortfalls are and where enablement can add value, and then ultimately also provide the reporting that is needed to provide that forensic evidence, not only to sales managers, but also to senior executive leadership.
Yeah, and this will ultimately, be help elevate the role, because you're doing data-driven enablement and you're also measuring the metrics and also what is the impact of those initiatives. So
Absolutely.
yeah, great point. Felix, the other question I have is, not a lot of companies are hiring in today's market, and we know the actual enablement is not just about training the new joiners or the sales team. So what do you think is the role of sales enablement when you're not hiring a lot of reps today? What kind of enablement can you provide to probably a tenured rep?
I think, again, it comes back to, the mission of enablement being to increase sales effectiveness. And when you have new hires, of course, they will have a lower base to work from because they haven't learned yet how to sell at this particular company to this particular market yet, even though they might have operated in a similar industry before. But this is typically where you can, where you have the most learning happening and where you need to really be hands-on and making sure that they hit their milestones early on. But even when it comes to existing sales teams, unless every single person in that sales team has achieved mastery in selling that particular product to that particular market, unless that is the case, enablement always has work to do, right? And we talked about those benchmarks before. Every sales rep, no matter how experienced they are, always has room for improvement, right? And even if everybody achieves mastery, if a shift in the market happens, if certain market trends happen, a new competitor is on the horizon, the economy is declining, and suddenly the buyers have to cut costs and have to consider other solutions, whatever it might be, there's always movement and there's always room for improvement. B2B sales in particular is such a dynamic system that always requires updating. And that's why I really strongly believe that enablement can always add value as long as you have the means to actually identify and benchmark the state of sales effectiveness at your organization and what sort of improvements you can achieve with your enablement work.
Makes sense. And Felix, one more question I have is, we spoke about adding value to the tenured sales rep, and then you were talking about the different functions, which is the sales or the marketing or the customer success. In today's market, it's not just the sales enablement. I think we are talking about the entire revenue enablement, because in B2B world, I think probably more than half of the business is coming from the expansion or from the customer success. So how do you look at this shift of not just enabling the salespeople, but how revenue enablement can look at the entire customer facing reps and work towards enabling them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, it is really crucial for revenue enablement to measure the impact of their work across the entire go-to-market team, and as you mentioned, it's sales and customer success. In some companies, it even extends into marketing to some degree, right? That there's ongoing training being provided around certain technology tools or around the buyers or whatever it might be. Again, having those measurements in place is really crucial. And then once that is in place, again, revenue enablement really has the potential and the opportunity to optimize the entire go-to-market motion, right? Including marketing, sales, and customer success. And I think that the argument for revenue enablement is always a strong one, especially if go-to-market teams are downsized, right? Because if you have that evidence that revenue enablement has provided value in the past, you can then make the argument that if you're forced to do more with less, then suddenly revenue enablement is no longer optional, and it is really crucial to really maintain the effectiveness of the entire go-to-market team if revenue enablement is there, and they provide those ongoing effectiveness improvement and efficiency improvements across the entire customer journey. And I think if you have those numbers available, and if you have that evidence available, it will be really hard a case to make for any CFO to cut revenue enablement staff.
Yeah, and I think now is the case for that, because everybody is just forced to do more with less, and the revenue enablement again has become it's not optional at all, right? It's something that you have to do if you have to sustain quotas.
Oh, look, I mean, don't get me wrong. If you don't measure success and you don't have a focused way on improving certain KPIs, I think then a lot of CFOs will argue that it is optional. Revenue just because a team is called revenue enablement, I don't think will ensure that they are safe from any budget cuts. You still have to prove that business impact. But if you actually do that in a structured way and you have the numbers to prove the impact, then I don't think it can be optional for any CFO.
Yeah. And I think it could be different. It could be different metrics for different people. Again, for sales, it could be maybe the sales velocity. For customer success, it could be the net run rate or the other metrics. But yes, you have to tie it to the outcome. By just saying revenue enablement, it's not going to make your CFO believe that they are actually doing the revenue enablement.
Absolutely.
Felix, one last question. I think you covered a lot of insights in the question that I had asked. Because you speak to a lot of enablement people and you help set up a lot of companies enablement from grounds up. So what are the a few things that you think are very common mistakes that are happening, and what do you think, where do you want to see the mindset shift in terms of sales enablement, that hey, I wish more enablement people could will understand this, and then obviously it will better than the entire enablement community.
So I think one common misconception that I really want the enablement community to move away from is that to be a successful enabler, you have to have been a salesperson, right? I think this is a misconception that is, to me, quite similar to the mindset that leads to the best sellers being promoted to self-management positions, right? And as we all know, the skill set is a completely different one. Suddenly you need to be able to lead, you need to be able to coach, and so on. And I think the same applies to sales enablement. Just because you have been a seller and potentially also a good seller, that might give you some knowledge around sales and possibly also in the context of the organization that you're operating in. But I really strongly believe that the skill set that is needed for sales enablement to be really successful is a different one. And this is more about change management. This is more about analyzing data. This is more about stakeholder management. And so on. Yeah. So it's more, there's such a different skill set required to effectively impact a sales organization that it's a missed opportunity to only focus on whether or not the salesperson has previously had a quota and has been carrying a bag, as they say. Yeah. That's number one. I think the skill set has to be a different one for enablement to truly make a larger scale business impact. The other common mistake that I come across is that organizations that do want to embark on the enablement journey oftentimes buy into the notion of enablement, and they really believe that it can make a difference. And then suddenly they get so excited that they commit to too many initiatives. Yeah, they say, enablement can do all these things. Let's do these 10 initiatives this year, and this will completely transform our sales results. Right. And this is a really big mistake because it is really counterproductive to the momentum that enablement needs to build. Yeah. If an enablement function is really new, it is really important to have quick wins to get everybody across the business excited and contributing to enablement success. Right. If you peak too early with your excitement around enablement and there's too many initiatives happening at the same time, what typically happens then is that none of them get executed properly. There's a lack of focus. People lose interest. Then you don't have the evidence around the actual business impact being achieved by enablement. And that's where then senior management turns around and says, okay, I know we were quite excited about enablement, but we can probably do without it. And that's where budgets get cut. So my recommendation on that front would be focus on fewer initiatives that promise to deliver quick wins and then work from there.
Yeah. No, I think it's a lovely insight because most of the enablement initiatives are about behavioral change. And if you're trying to bring a lot of behavioral change at once, it's not going to work well for the sellers as well as for the frontline sales managers. So I think, Yeah,
absolutely. And I think a lot of companies don't even have a sales process or sales methodology, right? And if you think about introducing a new sales methodology, there is, until you actually can see the results and until it is really repeatable and predictably being implemented, so much time is required, right? And I would estimate probably twice the sales cycle that you would typically require after the rollout of the sales methodology is probably when you see the first results. And it is overly optimistic to believe that as soon as the training is finished, you will instantly see results. This is typically not what happens.
Yeah, well, Felix, great insights. Again, I think that brings us to the end of the show. It was such an insightful session. I am sure a lot of other enablement people will value from it because you have a depth of experience in terms of talking to enablement and setting up the enablement initiatives. Thank you again for doing this. I know it's pretty late for you.
That's all right. Devanshu, I had a blast, and thank you so much for having me on. And let's do this again soon.
Absolutely. Pleasure.